Yeah, for supporters, there's been a lot of encouraging signs with what the mayor's doing and his Think Big campaign, but this certainly isn't the first time that we've talked about building a replacement arena. And I think it's important to go back and look at the failures, and that's what I want to do now, to sort of get an understanding of how we got here. I sat down, or I talked with Chuck Daldorf, who was the chief of staff to former Mayor Heather Fargo. So let's take a look at the video. Ed Fletcher here with Chuck Daldorf, former chief of staff to Mayor Heather Fargo. How you doing, Chuck?
I'm doing great, Ed. Thank you.
I'm sure you've been paying attention. The Sacramento Kings were almost all but out of town, and then Mayor Kevin Johnson goes to New York to plead the team's case. Since then, he's gathered a group of regional leaders hoping to try to come up with an arena financing plan, but it seems like we've been down this road before.
Oh, yeah, we've absolutely been down this road before, and it's a very hard road to go down. It's very hard to assemble the amount of money it takes to build a new sports and entertainment center, especially one in the downtown area.
Does this sort of arena financing plan compare to the ones you've been part of putting together?
Well, I think the overall idea is kind of the same in a lot of ways. We're talking about a lot of money. I mean, somewhere arguably between $450 million to maybe as much as $600 million that have to be assembled to be able to do the construction, and arguably that also includes the infrastructure that it would require to build this kind of a facility. So the same dynamic is still there. We have a huge price tag and not a lot of sources to go to find that money.
Talk about the difficulties raising money for this, both then and now.
Sure. Well, fundamentally, it's a massive amount of money to put together to build any kind of a new facility, and the ownership of the sports franchise itself, it's a private venture. So when you have a private business that needs a significant amount of capital to go ahead and make a new investment, we wind up with this very awkward relationship between the public sector, in this case the city of Sacramento, and the private sector, in this case being the Maloof Sports and Entertainment. So that dynamic itself is very, very challenging. On top of that, the first time or two that Mayor Fargo and city leadership went through trying to put together a deal for a sports and entertainment facility, the economy was very good. I mean, we were 2002, 2003, and in that time frame things were going well, and it was very, very difficult to get anywhere near the amount of money it was going to take to build a new facility, especially not using any amounts of public financing to actually build the facility. With the economy being down and that price tag being about the same, I just think this is a very, very tough challenge to take on.
Humor me. Give me a list of some of the previous efforts that you guys went through and some of the different plans you had for financing an arena.
Well, it kind of varied a couple of times. It started with this idea that maybe creating a zone around where the future arena would be in downtown and getting a food and beverage surcharge added to everybody who was in that zone would be one way to create enough money to go out and get bond money to build the facility. That was a good idea because in a lot of ways that was going to be the fairest way to get people who live outside of the city to help contribute to this effort. Unfortunately, that really didn't go very far at all. I think that iteration kind of lasted about 21 days before it had to be abandoned. There was so much pushback from that idea. There were other attempts to look at potentially having a surcharge on rent-a-cars, so an additional tax on rent-a-cars for tourists and business people coming to Sacramento. There was a variation, I think, that included the idea of potentially looking at an additional parcel tax within a certain area downtown, almost like what you would do with a business improvement district, to try to find some ways to create enough money to go out to the bond market and say, we have a revenue stream, now we'll borrow the rest of the money to build this facility. There were individual attempts that never got anywhere at all in trying to find ways to propose coming forward. And in the end, it kind of led to where Heather Fargo, as mayor, always wanted to go, which was we wanted to go ask the voters in the city of Sacramento, is there any will or any desire to move forward and use public money in any way, shape, or form to help build a new sports and entertainment facility? And the voters overwhelmingly, with measures Q and R, said absolutely not, with capital letters. So now that dynamic is kind of more difficult, I think, for Mayor Johnson, because that's completely off the table. I think it would be very, very difficult to turn around to the voters now and say, okay, I know you said this then, but things have changed now with the team leaving. Does that change your mind? I don't believe that that's changed anybody's mind as far as the voters are concerned.
Earlier, there was an earlier question, and I talked about leadership, lack of leadership. I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about Q&R, and Marcos and I talked about this ad nauseum back then. Marcos was on the show, and we go back and forth on the necessity of the arena. And my problem then, there was one, trivial issue, was the Maloof's TV commercial with the opulent presentation of eating the burgers at the same time asking people to pay for an arena. And then the closed-door sessions where they would go in with Mayor Heather Fargo and the Maloofs would come out with some higher demands and some higher expectations, and things dissolved. That's one side of failure then, and lack of leadership, and maybe even lack of marketing at that point. But the other side was it needed to be a regional effort from the start. This isn't just about Sacramento. This is about a 6-county region, area, spread, reach, development. In Oklahoma City, when you talk to the mayor in Oklahoma, Mick, and you say, Mick, how did you impress the county folks to get on board? He said, I'd go to suburbia and I'd say, point where downtown is. And if they pointed down to the tall buildings into the urban area, they got it. They understand that that's the magnet, that's the gravity, that's where you want to place it so that you can benefit the surrounding area. What Mayor Heather Fargo didn't do then is that she didn't make it regional. What is positive at this point is that it is regional, and that's the only way it's going to work for the 6 counties, the immediate 4 counties, to buy in and get behind this effort, both to get it done and also to find the funding for it.
I have a friend who likes to say that sometimes you need to go through hell to get to heaven, and I think that probably holds true in this case. There is no concentration of wealth in Sacramento, not compared to other much larger cities, and there's no basis for support of public subsidies for an arena. So that created a very difficult situation. And I was really tough on Mayor Fargo at the time for not being able to create any kind of a coalition to get behind this, and frankly for getting behind a couple of harebrained ideas to finance the thing. But I don't think that we should lose sight of the fact that at that time the King's owners were very difficult to deal with as well. The commercial that you mentioned was really, it was at the tail end of when Q&R went down in flames, and they had already walked away from the table. And that commercial of basically touting their net worth at $1 billion was like sticking a middle finger at the entire community, I felt.
How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her.
Burger.
She kissed me.
Fries,
No one said, ain't
and a
that
24-year-old bottle of French Bordeaux.
Tell me
The
quick.
Carl's Jr. $6,000 combo meal, exclusively at the Palms.
Anyway, and so they were very difficult to deal with. I was in Las Vegas during the negotiations, very one-sided negotiations. Q&R would have delivered for the King's owners essentially a free arena, and the terms even then weren't satisfactory to them, and they walked away. There was no campaign. So when I hear Chuck Daldor say, the voters resoundingly rejected it, it just drives me crazy because there was nothing to vote for. There was no campaign. We'll never know if there had been a unified campaign. We'll never know if Sacramento voters would have approved it or not. They voted the way they did because there was nothing there, and so all that happened, and it had basically set the stage for now, which is, putting us on the brink of losing the team. I think finally focused people in the right direction, because back then we were all kind of caught up in side issues.
We can't forget the infamous scene at the rail yards. I mean, you talk about the voters resounding no. You got to be kidding me. I mean, they sat there and watched the Maloofs walk away from, a stand just like yours did, and it was, in the key pivotal moment of whatever little campaign they had. Hey, voters, vote for Q&R, and now the owners of the team itself want nothing to do with it. They're walking away from the plan, and then it goes to a vote. So at the end of the day, I mean, that was a completely disastrous project. I really don't think it can be overstated the importance of the dynamics between the owners and the political leadership and how much that's changed. Because to me, Kevin Johnson is worlds apart from Heather Fargo on this issue, and I think the Maloofs, like Marcos said, are a whole different group than they were back then. You know, back then, I'll never forget getting a tour of the Palms Casino from them and walking through, and a lot of the ideas they had for the Palms, they would sit there and talk about, oh, we want to do this in the new arena. And it's, you know, I understand the desire to have an incredible palace, but that's what they wanted. They wanted the Taj Mahal. The terms were never good enough. That has changed. Now you're talking about they have a willingness to be a tenant in this venue, which is huge. You know, a company like AEG or maybe Live Nation, you know, it can drive a lot of musical acts here and things like that. Now that's the driving force instead of an ownership group that was tough to deal with.
You know, to add on, and just a second here, Ed, I think sometimes out of humility comes a great piece of rough produced fusion of critical mass. The Maloofs have been humbled for a number of reasons, and let's just go with the economy at that. And the city's been humbled. I mean, the city's struggling to develop anything, to get past areas of blight, and to add jobs, to grow a thriving private sector. For the first time in a long time, this business of basketball and this entity called an arena and sports and entertainment complex and this region, the six-county region, they all need each other. That's the positive in this. There's a great respect of you need us and we need you to move this forward. And I think that's where the momentum really rests versus 4 or 5 or 6 years ago where you had egos and demands and what I want in the way.